The last Ptolemy, Drusilla, was born in 38 AD in her father's northwestern kingdom of Mauritania. She was named after her sister and the late sister of the Roman Emperor Caligula. Her father's name was Ptolemy, and he was a loyal vassal king to the quickly expanding Roman Empire. Drusilla would be the only child of King Ptolemy and his wife Julia Urania. They likely would have had more children, but Drusilla's infant life took a drastic turn for the worst when she was only 2. Her father would be assassinated after being invited to Rome by Emperor Caligula in 40 AD. Drusilla should have succeeded Ptolemy as queen, but the kingdom of Mauritania was annexed by the Roman Empire following the assassination. Drusilla's saving grace came at the beginning of 41 AD. Her father's childhood friend and first cousin, Claudius, would be crowned as the new Roman emperor after the murder of Caligula and a massacre of the ruling Julio-Claudian dynasty. Claudius decided to take in the daughter of the man he had grown up with and raise her in the imperial court. It seemed a Roman tradition to keep the descendants of Cleopatra closer than even enemies. They were a threat after all, even this 3-year-old was. The Ptolemies were simply too well known and too ancient to not hold respect, even if her bloodline had been diluted by 3 generations of outside of the family marriages. Drusilla grew up in Rome as her father and grandmother had, and lived as normal life as someone in her circumstances could. At the age of only 17, Emperor Claudius decided to get rid of the Ptolemaic Dynasty, hopefully for good this time. There was 2 ways that this could be achieved, and only one was painless. Kill her, the daughter of the man you grew up with, or marry her off to a noble that hopefully wouldn't use the power of the Ptolemaic Dynasty against Rome. Claudius had thought that he had found the man for the job, and another. In 53 AD, Drusilla married a man named Antonius Felix, who was then sent to govern the province of Judea alongside his newlywed wife. Marcus Antonius Felix was of Greek descent and was himself descended from ancient kings. In Judea, her new husband didn't seem to be the man that Claudius thought him to be. He accepted bribes, corrupted the government, and looked the other way at open rebellions. After only a year of marriage, he also began looking for a new wife. He found one in the daughter of King Herod. Her name was also Drusilla, which makes the situation all the worse for our Drusilla Ptolemy. After divorcing Drusilla Ptolemy, he sent her back to the Roman court, which is a bit surprising, but I guess if you're governing Judea, you might want a connection to King Herod for simple legitimacy, not some queen of a dynasty that hadn't ruled in Judea for over a century. Shortly after returning to Rome, Emperor Claudius would die, and the infamous Emperor Nero would succeed him. Like Caligula, Nero wasn't terrible for the first months of his reign. He was only a boy, and much of the real power rested in the hands of his mother and his tutor, a man that you may know as Seneca. After spending 2 more years in Rome, Drusilla would again be married off, not to a mere Roman noble this time, but to an actual king. Well, a priest king at that. Before mentioning the name of this priest king, I need to mention his relation to Drusilla, the daughter of King Herod. The priest king's older brother and the former priest king was once married to her, making them ex-in-laws. Although an arranged marriage, it seemed like Drusilla Ptolemy was getting some form of revenge on her Herodian counterpart. The priest king that she was set to marry was a distant cousin of the Ptolemies, a man named Sohaemus, the ruler of Emesa, a kingdom located largely in modern-day interior Syria. Emesa was one of the many client vassal kings under the overall control of the Roman Empire. His descent has been disputed, with some claiming him to be a Phoenician, while other sources may prove him to be of Arab origin. Now that we know what Sohaemus was a king of, we can ask what he was a priest of. The answer is simple: the sun. King Sohaemus was a priest of a cult that worshipped the sun by venerating a large black meteorite that had fallen near the city of Emesa. They called their sun Elagabalus, which translated to Lord of the Mountain, and worshipped him as their singular solar deity. Drusilla was now the Sun Queen of Syria, in contrast to her grandmother, who had been the Moon Queen of Mauritania. On top of being the priestly ruler of Emesa, Rome entrusted Sohaemus enough to also give him ownership of Sophene, a majority Armenian and Kurdish kingdom on the edge of the empire. This he governed well, along with Emesa. In under a year of marriage, the couple welcomed their one and only known son, who would take the name of Gaius Julius Alexion. The first part of his name is obviously a nod to his distant relative, Gaius Julius Caesar. The last part of his name is also a nod, but not as noticeable at first. Alexion is a spin on the name Alexander, which happened to be the name of a previous priest-king of Emesa, as well as his possible, very distant relative, Alexander the Great. King Sohemus, like Drusilla's father had been, was the definition of a loyal client king, not once disobeying the orders of Rome. He was even loyal to the new Flavian dynasty when they came to rule the Roman Empire after the suicide of Emperor Nero in the subsequent year of the Four Emperors. Drusilla and her priestly king prospered under the rule of Rome for 15 years. So too did the religion of Elagabalus, which slowly began to spread across the empire. In 73 AD, King Sohemus would die, likely of natural causes, and he would be succeeded by his son that he had with Queen Drusilla, Gaius Julius Alexion. At the age of only 17, this newly crowned teenager was the king and cult leader of Emesa. In this transitional period, Drusilla Ptolemy likely assisted her son in managing Emesa and settled him down into his role. Drusilla outlived her second husband by 6 years, and so it is, in 79 AD, that the last person who could claim to be part of the main branch of the nearly 400-year-old Ptolemaic Dynasty died of unknown causes at the age of only 41. The sun had now set yet again on the Ptolemaic Dynasty, but as always, it would one day rise. As for her son, priest-king Gaius Julius Alexion, he would rule as priest-king until his death in 78 AD, at the age of only 22. He lived long enough to have a child, but after his death, Rome would formally annex their meteorite sun-worshipping client kingdom in Syria, just like they had in Mauritania. After this, the descendants of Queen Cleopatra of Egypt become increasingly hard to solidly track, although the religion of Elagabalus continued, meaning that someone had to be the leader of this sun-worshipping cult, leaving me and many other historians to assume that the line, who were once kings of Emesa, continued being the high priest of Elagabalus. As most things in history do, it finally came full circle. In the late 2nd century, more than 100 years after the death of Drusilla Ptolemy, the emperor Septimius Severus was crowned. He would marry a woman named Julia Domna. She was the daughter of the high priest of Elagabalus and the possible descendant of Drusilla, Julius Bassianus. Together, Septimius Severus and Julia Domna had 2 children, named Geta and Caracalla, who would rule the Roman Empire together briefly until Caracalla murdered his brother. Caracalla in turn would be murdered himself. However, the cousin of Caracalla would reclaim the seat of emperor after only a year. He was only a 14-year-old boy, but he was also the new high priest of Emesa. He would be known to all Romans as Emperor Elagabalus, taking the name of his god and even taking the black meteorite of Emesa with him to Rome. Elagabalus is widely considered the worst of all Roman emperors, and his cousin that succeeded him, Severus Alexander, did not fare much better. After his death is when historians start to signify the beginning of the crisis of the 3rd century. So there it is. The Ptolemaic Dynasty and Cleopatra's descendants may have just gotten their revenge by inadvertently ruining the empire that had ended their dynastic rule. The Ptolemies are often forgotten past Cleopatra and certainly past Caesarion. They were without a doubt one of the classical age's greatest dynasties, and what Rome did to them generation after generation after generation was just torture. From Egypt to Mauritania to Syria, the descendants of Cleopatra never had control over their own destinies. They were simply a tool the Romans raised in their courts, used when they wished, and tossed to the side when it benefited them.